And for whatever reason, we feel like we need to be strong around other people and we can't break down and fall apart because it's not socially acceptable. And I do think that our culture is grief averse.
I am Gloria Grace Rand, founder of The Love Method and author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Live, Love, Engage: How to Stop Doubting Yourself and Start Being Yourself. In this podcast, we share practical advice from a spiritual perspective on how to live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically, so you can create a life and business with more impact, influence, and income. Welcome to Live, Love, Engage. Namaste. Grief is something that we all experience in life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy to get through. But today's guest has quite literally written a book on the subject to help you traverse this journey with compassion and courage. But before I bring her on, I'd like to welcome those of you who may be new to Live, Love, Engage. I am Gloria Grace, and I help female entrepreneurs attract more clients with calm, clarity, and confidence by helping them to release negative thought patterns like self-doubt and poor self-worth. And joining us today in just a moment is Sheila Clemenson. She is a seasoned transition coach and author of the book Over the Rainbow: From the Depths of Grief to Hope. And Sheila knows the pain of grief all too well, losing her first husband at a young age to ALS. But through her own journey, she discovered how to create a sanctuary for those facing difficult situations, guiding them to grow and move forward. So without further ado, I'm going to bring her on so we can talk about this subject and how we can get through it with compassion. So here we go. There we go. Welcome, Sheila, to Live, Love, Engage.
Hi, Grace. It's wonderful to be here today. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, I appreciate having people like you on to talk about these things because we don't always talk about it, and yet it is something that we go through. I mean, it's inevitable. What is it they say? The only two sure things in life are death and taxes, and of course, grief isn't always just about death as well. I mean, sometimes that there's all kinds of different losses that we can have: death of a relationship or something going on with a job, if we lose a position. So let's talk a little bit. I thought we might start off with kind of talking about some of the complex emotions that come up when someone experiences a loss. Because I know I've had not just necessarily the inevitable sadness comes up. There's been other things too. So I wonder if you can shed some light on that for us.
Yeah. So essentially, I call myself a professional griever. and I know that it sounds kind of crazy, but when I look at my life and my grief experiences, they did start at a young age. I lost my father to suicide when I was 5 years old. And I did not know it was suicide at the time. I wasn't told that. I was told he was in a car accident by my mom because she probably didn't think a 5-year-old, of course, was going to understand something like that. But, not having a dad from 5 years old on, my life was living in that grief shadow. And so where I kind of go with that is that loss was profound from a young age. And all of the emotions that go with that just became very familiar to me. And then moving forward through my journey, loss of relationships, loss of innocence. There's some of that in my story about some sexual abuse I had when I was younger. Loss then of my first husband, Grant, and that is the incredible journey that I've written about in the Over the Rainbow book. Grief has become a companion for me. And I want to say that it's not comfortable, but you learn how to live with it, I think is the best way to say that. I don't care how long it's been since someone has died that you have cared about, that it has been important in your life. You are still experiencing that over time. I met with a woman yesterday. Her husband died 30 years ago, and she's like, we never really get over it. And I'm like, no, we never get over it. And so I think the emotions that creep in at any given time, we're learning how to live with them and manage them. Sometimes there's deep sadness. Sometimes that's tied to anniversaries or special days that you had together. Mother's Day and Father's Day that recently came up can certainly trigger a lot of things. So, and then there's an anticipatory grief that I don't think we talk about very much, Grace, that is when we've lost people or things before we've lost them. And that can be relationships that aren't going the way we want them to. It can look like a lot of different things. So grief is pretty extensive. It's not just to the death of somebody that we love dearly. It's so much more than that.
Mm. Yeah, I can understand that and relate to that. And I do know the significance of like different anniversaries or, significant dates that come up. But I want to ask you about this because I know for me, especially when I lost my brother died in his sleep at age 33 when I was like 17 years old. And not only did I have the sadness, but I also had a lot of anger. You know, at a young age, just, really being, it's like, how could you do this to mom? Especially he died on Mother's Day of all days. It's like, oh my gosh. I could, only imagine, God forbid
That's
something like
intense.
that. Yeah, would happen to me. But because it was a double whammy and her firstborn and everything. So, yeah, can you talk about that? How does, how do we deal with some of that, anger that comes up?
Anger is, ooh, I have to tell you, it's one of those emotions that I try to stay away from. And it's not comfortable for me.
Mm.
I'm a people pleaser. I want to make everybody happy. I'm a peacemaker. I want to take it all on and not let anybody see that anger. However, that anger shows up in different ways for different people, right? It could be being passive aggressive. It could be, I'm fine. And we know what fine means. I define it in my book. And that's effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. um, I think that sometimes we internalize that and get resentful, which is probably more of what I did. Um, I tried to show up as the best person that I could for my husband, Grant, when I was his caregiver, but we were on that journey for 4.5 years. And there was a lot of anger in our journey, our connection with what was happening. And I want to say, unfortunately, verbally, we took it out on one another, and I'm not proud of that. But I think it's important for people to know that I talk about that in my book because, um, it is a very real aspect of who we are. Some might say it's a shadow side of who we are, right? Living in that anger and that resentment. But I want to say that also sometimes we take that out on those we love the most because we're pretty confident they're not going to leave. And so my husband, Grant, and I, we went through that a lot together. And that was really challenging. And from a spiritual place, I have a really great story about connecting with a medium in the book where I asked the medium, can Grant forgive me for the things that happened that we didn't really want to go through, right? And she said, there's nothing to forgive. You were living in a human experience, and your spiritual selves and your souls don't need that. And she also brought Grant in, and there's some really cool stories to that. But I say that because sometimes we need that validation in some way. And I was still holding on to that guilt and shame from those angry outbursts and those really human situations. And I think that I needed to do what I needed to do to try to work through that guilt and that shame. And I did a lot of healing work on myself, and especially with some spiritual connections. So I share
Mm.
that in my book too.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I can relate to that because I know I was a sort of part-time caregiver for my sister while she was going through her cancer
Mhm.
journey, and yeah, and there were some times where, certainly she lashed out, but which was understandable because she's in pain, but sometimes I was just like, "I'm doing the best I can here." It's like, "You wanted this, now you change your mind," um and one thing that kept me from doing that too often was I had a meditation practice, and that I made sure I meditated every morning, and that helped me a great deal to not fly off the handle too many times. But you're right. We are human, and it's going to happen, even though we don't. We certainly understand what the other person is going through, and we don't want to do it, but you know stuff happens, and we sometimes we can only tolerate so much, and we reach our, and maybe something else has happened that's upset us, and so we take it out on them, unfortunately.
Well, and I want to say that those closest to us typically know how to trigger us more than anybody else that we know, right?
That's true.
They know
Yes,
how to
yes.
trigger it and stick the finger in and turn it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. This is true. Well, let's talk about a little bit. Let's go into some. Some of you talked about that you were able to do some, healing work on yourself, and to be able to help, especially some of that. You said that the shame and the guilt and things like that. So what strategies can people use, and especially I do want to focus in on entrepreneurs in particular, because that's who my audience is, but you know try to keep your business afloat while you're grieving, because I know I struggled with that myself. So what advice do you have for in general, going through this, but maybe even especially for folks who are trying to keep a business going at the same time?
Yeah. Well, I want to share something interesting. When I was writing my book, I connected spiritually, right? And I'm like, God, universe, why am I writing the grief book and not the career coaching book? Because I'm, a career coach, and I've been in HR for 20 plus years, and I help people connect with their meaningful purpose and help them get meaningful work. But yes, also job search, etc. Well, I had a client after I asked this, I had a client come in. He had sold his business as a CEO. He had lost his best friend in a very tragic, tragic way that I won't go into here, but it's intense. And he said to me, Sheila, I don't need you to be a therapist for me. I've got one of those. I need you to help me figure this out because I need to show up in my life for my family and myself. And I don't know how I'm going to do this. And so that right there coming in was like, okay, I'm holding space for people who have experienced a significant amount of loss and they're moving forward from that, right? I want to say that, well, what is it about that, right? Yes, getting a really exceptional therapist, somebody that you can work with, having some grief support groups, if that's something that you can connect with. I help people with that moving forward piece, but I think the number one thing that we always have to remember is radical self-care. And
Mm.
what does radical self-care look like for you may be very different from what it looks like for someone else. So I think it's important for people to be thoughtful about how they take care of themselves when they're in the grief wilderness, which is a term I've borrowed from Alan Wolfelt. He's locally a grief educator. We've never been in this place before, unless you have. And if you have, it's been different. And so, how are you going to take care of yourself in new ways? This might be setting boundaries with people. This might be not entertaining being around certain people that you have to do a lot more emotional work around. This could be looking at if you're feeling a little out of your body, because when we're grieving, we feel disconnected to our physical body. Get yourself into the earth. Get your feet in the ground, whether that's a beach, whether that's hiking, whether that's the earth. It's trying to help yourself reconnect within yourself, and anything that you can do with that. Sometimes that can look like, soothing ways of, the meditation that you talk about, the visualizations. Calm app is really a great one for that too. Other programs. When we look at, numbing ourselves in different ways. I talk about in the book how I was a dysfunctional griever. And I say dysfunctional, functionally dysfunctional, because I was stumbling around in the dark looking for the light switch in my underwear for years. So my book has a lot of humor in it about, kind of what not to do. I was on Zoloft and antidepressant for 5 years, and I say I highly recommend it, even though it might not be for everybody. And of course, I'm not a doctor, so I can't condone that. But, I think that, you have to do what you're drawn to doing. Numbing yourself in ways that aren't functional, the drinking, which I did, the inappropriate sexual relationships, the, whatever it was that I felt like I needed to bring in for myself. It was what I did, but it wasn't what necessarily was the healthiest thing for me. So I do talk about that in my book, though, that I think there's a humanness to that, but I think there are absolutely healthier ways to that. So I talk about that in my self-reflection exercises too.
Mm. And whoops. And yeah, and I can relate to that, because I tell you, when my sister passed, she was the last connection to the family I grew up with. And I was also with her when she passed, which I hadn't been with any other relatives. So it just hit me in so many different ways. And I had lost a ton of weight. I was doing really well. And I said, because food has always been my comfort, crutch to go to, I was like, you know what? I'm giving myself permission to indulge for a little while, because, in hindsight, I wish I hadn't, but, it was just like, I needed something to to help me numb the pain. And thankfully I, had alcoholism in the family, so I don't go that route. Food is my drug of choice instead. So
I'm a recovered alcoholic, 18 plus years, and I do talk about that journey in the book as well. Because that's very real for some people. Energy medicine, I'm a Reiki level 3 practitioner. I jumped into that, which was easy to do in Kauai, the Hawaiian Islands, so I brought in a lot of energy medicine. Massage therapy is amazing. So there are physical ways that you can bring that energy and that healing. You talk about being there with your sister when she died. I was there with Grant in the moment he passed away as well. And my book talks about our secret beach story, which is what happened on his last day. It makes grown men cry, and I'm proud of that. So it comes with a warning. But I think that, interestingly enough, after Grant died, in the moment that he was dying, he was really angry. He was angry because he didn't have enough morphine. And I put my arms around him in the moment he passed, and my friend put her arms around me. And that, I want to say that afterwards, I did feel some kind of attachments and some cords that kind of needed to be cut, just from that intensely emotional experience. But it was beautiful also, in the sense that it was also so hard too at the same time. And so this is where we talk about, having all of the variety of feelings at the same time, and that you can have all of the feelings at the same time. Especially when you're grieving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing I would like to just put out there for folks listening is to just, You mentioned before early on about radical self-care, and I would just say, just be kind to yourself. Just really be kind, because this is not, yeah, how no matter how it looks, sometimes people don't even react right away. It's later, that it hits them, and just know that I read a really great book that was actually in my sister had in her bookcase, and that I, took some books home and later was going through them and going, "Oh, isn't this an interesting book, Michaela, that you had for me to find?" And it was called Grieving Mindfully, and it really helped me a lot, and just to understand that it is sort of this roller coaster of emotions that come up, and that, and that you might be having a really great day and all of a sudden something happens. So it's okay.
Well, I have a big wave on my book for a reason.
Mm.
The grief waves.
Mhm.
And it's the grief waves that come in and they hit us and they knock us down, and you cannot prepare yourself or predict when they're going to happen. They can happen at any point in time. It doesn't matter how far along on your journey you are. 24 years, I'm finishing my book, and had a grief wave hit me, and I talk about it in the book.
Mm.
I've been married for 12 years. I've been with my next beloved, Sean, for 18. And you can still experience that even when you've moved forward, quote unquote, and built your life, right? Yeah, so I do want to say that, that's really profound, those experiences and those moments. What I also want to share about my book, which was not something that I would have predicted, some feedback that I got from one of my advanced readers was, Sheila, I didn't need your grief book because of what I'm experiencing. I haven't experienced the death of somebody close to me, fortunately, yet. But when I read your book, I have been able to show up for my family and friends who are grieving more fully than I could have before I read it.
Mm.
And that hit me like you wouldn't believe, because I was like, most people will look at my book and go, "Oh, I don't need that." And then they kind of treat grief like it's a contagious disease. You know,
Yes.
"Oh, I don't need that. I don't
Yeah,
need
yeah, yeah, not me.
that." So that was profound for me to say,
Mm.
you can read my book if you don't need it. Yes, it's a beautiful love story. Yes, I talk about living on Kauai. I talk about Hawaiian culture. I talk about some mystical things that are amazing. It's a great story if you don't need it. If you do need it, there's connection. There is
Mhm.
hopefully support, and there is somebody else that's telling you about their crazy experiences of when they were grieving that, like, most of the time people don't talk about, and they're extremely raw and vulnerable. And so I
Yes.
do talk about that here. But to hear that from one of my friends who was my advanced reader, and she said, I was able to show up for my aunt who lost my uncle 7 years ago. My other
Mm.
family members are saying, why isn't she over this yet? What's going on? Why is she having such a hard time? And my friend was able to just hold space with her and just say, it isn't about time, people.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that actually kind of brings me good segue to my next question, because I think that sort of is an example. So what are some common myths and maybe even taboos around grief?
Time, time heals all wounds. Because it doesn't. I think some other myths around this are, that you just get over it, but you don't. You bring it forward with you and you learn how to live with it. I think there is this whole idea about being strong for other people. And for whatever reason, we feel like we need to be strong around other people and we can't break down and fall apart because it's not socially acceptable. And I do think that our culture is grief averse. And I don't think that our culture here really knows how to incorporate the grieving process socially and culturally when in the HR world that I've been in for years, when you're given, 1 week to go to grieve, and then you're supposed to show back up, and you're like, how the heck am I going to show up in my work when my whole life has completely fallen apart and I have to move forward, and whatever that looks like for people. I want to say that really exceptionally great managers are your best ally and your best champion when you're grieving, because they're going to help you. Now, if you're a business owner, that's a totally different situation when you're an entrepreneur business owner and you're looking at grief from that perspective, because you're typically carrying your own load in yourself. So hopefully you have some emergency reserves that you're able to tap into, and you're able to take some time for yourself to do that internal processing and that heavier grieving. And I just say that, that's going to look different over time, but giving yourself time to do that. I have clients who I'm working with from a professional place who are taking, who take medical leaves, right? Or who take leaves to take some time for grief. We have unlimited paid time off that is becoming so popular. I'm curious about how people are testing that in their grief process and taking care of themselves. And I would highly encourage it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But it's certainly harder as an entrepreneur when you're carrying all of your weight yourself, and how you show up. And, you talk about authenticity in your podcast and in your work you do. That authenticity piece is maybe not wearing the grief mask. Maybe it's telling somebody, I'm having a tough day today. I'm okay, but just know that.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. And so, like, from a coaching perspective, which you're a coach, from that coaching perspective, it's about like, what's happening? What's the temperature in the room today? I want you to know this is going on for me. We're doing our work, but I want you to know what's happening so that you can know something about my life. So many people want to be private and they don't want to tell people anything. But if you don't tell people what is happening with you, they're not going to be able to support you in a way that they would normally be able to support you, or they would humanly, connecting in the humanness of the experience, be able to support you in a more nurturing, compassionate, thoughtful way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just share a brief story. I have a Facebook group that's called the Soulful Women's Network, and we meet either online or in person once a month. And I guess this was now about 2 months ago when we last met online, is that we had two of the women in our group. One woman mentioned that, yeah, she had just, I think, lost her brother-in-law maybe, or something like that, or a sister, or something. I forget what it was, but, and so she was, feeling a little emotional. And then because she opened up, then someone else in the group said, yeah, I actually just lost a good friend of mine as well recently. And, and then it kind of brought up for me, oh, I know this was during the month of May, and which was when my brother had passed, and so it was like, so I started getting emotional. But it was really great that we were able to hold space for each other and really, be there and be able to support each other through that, because I think it is so important. Yes, you don't want to necessarily maybe, kind of, have everything come out, necessarily like on social media per se, but you could still.
You don't have to have diarrhea at the mouth.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say vomit, but yeah, basically, it's like we don't have to go into everything, but we can at least acknowledge and say, hey, I'm kind of going through a little thing right now, and not as perky as I would like to be. So just pardon me for now, and I will won't let this wave pass. And just be able to do that.
I love that. There's an honesty that connects with that. While at the same time, we look at this too, right? And, I talk about the stupid shit that people say and do when you're grieving. And I have a certain place in my chapter for that. And I think that that's really important because people will say and do stupid things. And you have to decide whether you're going to take it personally or not. And when we are sensitively huh, feeling all of our emotions to the point that we feel so raw, like I used to tell people I felt like I was walking around naked in public. I felt that raw and vulnerable when I was grieving. You hold space with that, and just any little thing can sometimes set you off or rub you the wrong way, right? When you think about, the different things that people say or do, you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. But at the same time, you're in a different space, a more sensitive space as well. And so I just say that if you can't take it in stride, that's okay. Tell somebody. I said in my book, I'm sure that I thought about telling somebody to F off more than I actually told them to. But thinking that is not a bad thing either.
That's true.
You're, and so, you know, I think that, then there is this whole other aspect of toxic positivity, right?
Yeah.
And, I think the things that people might say that can be hurtful, right? Like some people might have said to me, well, you're young, you're going to find another husband. You'll get married again and have a baby someday. Your life will return to normal, whatever normal was or is, which
Yeah.
doesn't exist. So, you hold space with that and you're like, have you ever experienced the death of somebody? And probably not. But people try to, it's almost like they try to make themselves feel better by saying something. And I want to say, instead of saying anything, if someone will allow you to hug them, hug them. Sometimes it's as simple as, this is really effed up, this is really a messed up situation. And what can I do to just be here for you? So I think that there is that uncomfortableness with supporting people in those places. And our culture does not prepare people for that.
Yeah.
So we have to find it other places.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you did have that suggestion that when people don't know what to say, oftentimes it is just, squeeze their hand, give them a hug, and as you say, just say, what can I do? What can I do? How can I help? And that can just be so much better, just because we all want to be seen, we all want to be heard, and we want to, we don't need to necessarily want advice in this moment. We just want to be able to be, I think.
And at a certain point in your process, there will be crickets, right? Like nothing.
Yeah.
And that's when you're sitting more deeply with your own emotions and your own feelings. And that's when the grief really hits people.
Yeah.
So trying to invite people in when you can or when you want to, and trying to learn how to ask for what you need. If you're not good at that, grief support groups can help with that. Therapy can help with that. I think that people just have to do what they can to support themselves, and just remember that people are not mind readers. It's really wonderful if you have people in your life who are. Keep them very close to you. I had some mind readers, and my gosh, keep them really close to you because you're going to need them.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, this has been so wonderful. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that I should have, or any other last point you want to make before we end this discussion today?
So I want to say that, moving forward through grief is a journey. It is a discovery process. It's discovering who you are in your new state of being, the new you coming through that experience. and working through that experience. It's not something that just, you get over. It's just not something that you just wake up one day and everything's okay. You're slowly and sometimes quickly putting a foot in front of the other and moving forward. And then you're falling back from time to time back into the grief pit, and then climbing your way back out and standing up. And then the sun finally shines on you and you're able to smile again.
Mm-hmm.
And that resilience and that joy will come through again. And you will have moments of that while you are grieving. And it's okay to experience the wide range of emotions of where you're at. So I have a companion journal that goes with my book that people can download the first 3 chapters for free online at SheilaClemenson.com. And just that my book has a lot of self-reflection exercises at the end of every chapter to support and help you wherever you are on that journey, because this book is a 24-year journey of my grief, which I think is really good for people to know. It's not just, it's different stages. And so it kind of helps people to know. Someone asked me, how long does it take to get to a place where you finally feel functional? And I say it's different for different people.
Yeah.
But, think about how long you were with that person, how much they meant to you, and how much of your life they were a part of. And you can start seeing how that moves forward from there. My career business transitions coaching services, it's transitions with an S coaching services with an S.com. I do career coaching, and that isn't just job search, but it's kind of helping people figure out where they want to go, what's that next adventure they want to have, whatever stage of life that they're in. And I always find that there is that moving forward piece professionally that people like to connect with while they're grieving, because they can't do what they were doing the same ever again. So they're looking for something new and how they're going to incorporate this next journey of their life. And I would be honored to connect with people. And I offer complimentary sessions online to support people with that too, to get a taste of, kind of what I do with people. So yeah, thank you for letting me share that.
Awesome. Yeah, it's that last point is so important because I know when my sister passed, I was in the middle of a program, but I suddenly wasn't sure what the heck I wanted to do anymore. And, do I still want to do the business I was in? And so, it takes a while to sort of sort all those things out. And I do think that sometimes you will sort of experience like, I'm feeling okay today. Oh, and isn't that a nice change? and be like, oh, okay, cool. So this is what that felt like. It's been a while. So
And then we'll eventually have more of those days.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been just a delight talking with you. And I know that you've helped a lot of folks and will continue to help folks. And I will have all of your information in the show notes for those of you who are listening. So just go back down and check that out if you're listening on one of your favorite podcast platforms. So
thank you so much, Grace, and all of the work that you're doing for people and in our world as well. I'm grateful that you're here for us too.
Well, thank you. And I do want to thank all of you for watching on YouTube, for watching on social media, for listening today. And I am so blessed. And I want to start. I was looking recently at all the wonderful people who have left reviews on Apple, and I'm going to start doing shout outs. I promise I will, because it just touches my heart from around the world, which is pretty cool. So thank you again. And I want to encourage you, if you are not subscribed yet, please do so. And you can do it on your favorite podcast platform at Gloria Grace Rand on YouTube. And until we meet again, I encourage you to go out and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.